The picture-perfect honeymoon after a fairy tale wedding took a turn for the worst when the new bride was tragically killed in a country so very different to her own. The murder would not only make headlines in South Africa, but around the world. And as the case was looked into deeper, the cracks in the fairy tale facade would reveal themselves. And in time, so many broader issues would be brought to light. As an Indian South African, today I dig deeper. I mean, way deeper. I'm talking serious deep dive sort of deeper, to explore the roads that led to the murder of Annie Dewani. Hello and welcome to episode 32 of Makeup and Mayhem True Crime with me, your host, Bella Monsoon. Before I get into today's case, which I'm sure you well may have heard of, I would like to state for the record that I am not clinically diagnosing anyone mentioned in this episode, nor am I placing the blame on any of the parties. I am simply providing potential theories to a crime that in my eyes has many loose ends. The aim of this? To not only aid a better understanding of the elements and circumstances of the tragedy, but to also open up a conversation about the prevalent issues that this crime brought to light. Some of these issues may be difficult to think about, let alone voice, but I feel like they are necessary conversations. For those of you who are new, let me introduce myself. So here it is in a nutshell. I'm a mental health professional who just so happens to be obsessed with makeup, true crime, and uncovering the motives that drive people to do what they do. So what this means is that every single week I post a brand new video looking at a real life crime from a psychological viewpoint. And every alternate week I also complete an easy to follow makeup tutorial whilst discussing these cases. During these episodes, I also try to share psychological knowledge and concepts that you may or may not be aware of in an easy to understand format. So, if all of that sounds like something that is right up your alley, then please do consider subscribing and joining the Bellaboo family. But if you're more a fan of podcasts, no worries, I got you covered. You can also find my sister podcast on all streaming channels, Murder and Mayhem South African True Crime. Just a quick disclaimer for today's episode. Today's story contains material citing murder. As always, I mean absolutely no disrespect to the victim mentioned nor her family. The purpose of this video is to shed further light on the heinous crime that was committed, whilst spreading awareness about the psychological nature of the narrative. This story has been thoroughly researched by myself and myself alone, as always, and includes real-life accounts, videos, and footage of individuals involved directly in the case. So without further ado, let's get on to it. This episode begins with Annie, of course, but first with how she came to be. Her paternal grandfather was from India, but had moved to Uganda to work and later raise a family. And so this is where her father Vinod was born, grew up, and would later come home to visit during holidays while studying in Bangalore. That was until Idi Amin, the president of Uganda at the time, ordered the expulsion of 80,000 Asians. After a short period in an Austrian refugee camp, the family was relocated to Sweden. They soon learned to adapt to the new language, the new land, and their new jobs, picking strawberries. After a little while in Sweden, Vinod met Nilham, who was from northwest London, and the pair were married in 1976. And so they came to live in Mariestad, a place that welcomed them with open arms. A place home to only around 16,000 residents with barely any crime. And so the Hindocha family grew. Annie Nena Hindocha was born on the 12th of March 1982 in Sweden. She grew up the middle child with two siblings, a younger brother Anish and an older sister Ami. She was described as her father's little princess. She loved Barbie dolls, Winnie the Pooh, and her cousin Sneha. The two were incredibly close. In primary school, Annie wrote a book about her hopes and dreams, and about how one day she would grow up and meet her own Prince Charming. After school, she went on to study electronic engineering and later innovation engineering. She ended up taking a year off in 2006 though, when her mother was diagnosed with cancer and she moved back home to look after her. And about a year after that, she got a job at the company Ericsson in Stockholm. And in the years to follow, she would meet the man who would later change the entire course of her life. And so, let me introduce you to Shrien Dewani. Like Annie's father, Shrien's parents were from Africa. His mother Snella had moved to the UK from Uganda, whereas his father Prakash was from Kenya. Prakash was a talented and hard-working pharmacist who soon launched a successful chain of elderly care homes, PSP Healthcare, which was based in Bristol. The family became incredibly wealthy as a result, and Shrien was born on the 29th of December 1979 into this wealth. As he grew up, he was privately educated at the Bristol Grammar School, where he was described as a talented, popular, and gregarious student. After finishing school, he went on to attain a degree in economics from the University of Manchester. He spent his gap year traveling to Ghana as a volunteer aid worker before completing his studies and going on to qualify as a chartered accountant with Deloitte. He worked in London up until 2005, where he had then moved back to Bristol to help his family run their chain of companies. During the years that followed, he became engaged to Rani Kansagra, the daughter of the tycoon who funded the Indian airline SpiceJet. However, in February of 2009, he had cancelled plans for their wedding, despite protests from her and her family. And it was shortly after this that he had met Annie. It would later be revealed that the pair had met through Annie's mother's sister-in-law. Not an official arrangement like in many other Indian families, but rather an introduction. The pair had hit it off though, and in later accounts, Shrien would say that he was instantly physically attracted to her, loved her bubbly personality, and sensed that there was a mutual chemistry. Their first formal date was to go and watch The Lion King in theatre, and from that point forward, they had alternated weekends between Bristol and Stockholm, where Annie was living. They started dating, and yeah, they had their rough patches, but I mean, it's not uncommon in many relationships. However, the issues became more significant, and they often revolved around Shrien's controlling behavior. Both families were Hindu and followed the principles of Hinduism. However, the Dewanis were more conservative and religious. Just a few months after the couple had met and started dating, I think it was the second time that the Hindochas had actually met Shrien, they were presented with a thali, a silver dish with fruits and nuts and a Ganesh statue to symbolize an engagement. This was the first time that both Annie and the Hindochas had heard of this engagement. However, after deliberation and with no real reason to turn it down, the gesture was accepted. Annie was at odds with the decision though, as she stated that she liked him, but she just wasn't sure that she loved him. She had expressed notions via text message that he was obsessed over cleanliness, monitored her everyday whereabouts, clothing choices, and life, and even at one point accused her of acting like a tramp when she had been carrying items in a plastic bag after shopping in Oxford. In June of 2010, Shrien had told her to pack a bag, and he had surprised her with a private jet trip to Paris. He formally proposed at the Hotel Ritz in Paris, with an engagement ring worth £25,000, roughly the equivalent of 287,000 rand at the time, balanced on a single red rose. He appealed to her sense of romance, and she said yes. The couple then spent the weekend at the £600 a night, around 6,900 rand at the time, hotel. Shortly afterwards, Annie had moved to Bristol to help Shrien run his family's business. Everything seemed great for a while, and Annie would tell friends and family that she was happy. Just 2 months later, though, she had messaged her cousin Sneha during a trip to Mumbai with the Dwanis. She had expressed over a few days that she didn't want to be around those people, that she hated them, and that she wanted to cry herself to death. Later, on the 25th of August, she had texted Sneha again. Crying every day, catastrophic, and so much to do that I can't cope. I feel abandoned by everybody. Fighting a lot with Shriyan. Told him I'm going home. Wish I never got engaged. Everybody tells me how fortunate I am. Even my designer tells me he's good looking and that I'm lucky. We're seeing each other for 3 days and only fight. I don't want to marry him. I'm going to be unhappy for the rest of my life. If I knew this, I would not have got engaged. Do you think I'll be able to find someone else if I break this? Feels bad that everyone has booked their tickets. I'm not happy. One cannot even hug him. We have nothing in common. He is putting pressure on everything. He's a perfectionist. I mean, these are not really the type of conversations that someone deeply in love with their partner has, and it appeared that their relationship was quite volatile. In September of that year, their relationship hit breaking point, with Annie terminating the engagement. She had gone so far as to throw the engagement ring at Shriyan. She would go on to call off the wedding 3 times, but every single time, Shriyan would change her mind. I'll get into that a little while later. The wedding, however, was still planned, mostly by Annie, and the location was decided. The Hindocha family also did not pay a dowry to the Dwani family as they belong to the Lohana caste, a Hindu social class or group where dowries don't apply or exist in their culture. There was also no prenup signed prior to the big event, and so the big day arrived. Annie and Shriyan's wedding seemed like something out of a fairy tale. On the 29th of October, the couple were married at the Lake Pavani Resort outside of Mumbai. 350 guests attended the lavish 3-day Hindu marriage event with a civil ceremony planned for 2011 for those guests, particularly friends from the UK, who were not able to attend. The wedding, to anyone watching, appeared to be a dream come true. And initially, it was. However, after the first day, Shriyan had told Annie that her sari didn't look right. He would often pick at things about her, like the way she dressed or certain habits she had. From that point in the wedding, she had confessed to Sneha that they were just pretending to be a happy couple. There are so many beautiful aspects of an Indian wedding ceremony that it would take me hours to explain each one. But after the festivities were over on the 3rd and final day, the Hindochas bid farewell to their daughter, who was going to start a new life with her spouse. Little did Vinod and Nilham know that this farewell would be their last one. After the wedding, the couple had spent a week back in the UK to celebrate Deepavali, the Festival of Lights. Shriyan, or rather his personal assistant, had planned the honeymoon, with him keeping the destination he had chosen a secret from Annie up until she had accidentally found out about it 2 days prior to departure. I mean, how did he expect her to pack the right things if she didn't even know where in the world she was traveling to? Things between the two were still turbulent, even after the wedding. And just days before the honeymoon, Annie had mentioned wanting a divorce. She had emailed him saying, "You did say if you saw in Crystal Ball how this marriage would have been like, then you wouldn't got married." And he had responded in the early hours of the next morning, "I did not say I regret things." On the 5th of November, she had said, "I don't want an insecure man, or a man that feelings doesn't come naturally, that you have to force yourself." And she added, "I am ready to pack and leave, and this is not a joke." But regardless of all of this, on the 7th of November, the newlyweds arrived in South Africa for their honeymoon. Their first destination was at a luxury safari resort, Chitwa Chitwa, in the Kruger National Park, where a suite was around 35,000 Rand a night during peak season. The other tourists and staff would note that the couple really didn't appear to be on their honeymoon, as they barely touched or kissed. For photos, they would smile and appear like a happy couple, but off camera, it was a different story. During this time, on the 10th of November, Annie had sent a text message. "I am really trying. He's a nice guy in all the ways, but I don't feel happy at all." The next day, however, she had sent another message. "It is going better than before. Hard to explain, but I'll call you as soon as I return. Hate the word divorce." After their safari had come to an end, Annie and Shrien had touched down in the beautiful city of Cape Town, notoriously home to one of the 7 wonders of the world, Table Mountain. Now, in order to understand what will transpire over the next 36 hours, I'm going to share both major versions of the events, as told by Shrien on the one hand, and on the other hand, told by the other participants, CCTV footage, and other evidence. I'll be sharing this info side by side, and you can be the judge. At the airport, instead of arranging a shuttle through the hotel that they were staying at, Shrien had been apparently approached by one of the waiting drivers, who would later be identified as Zola Robert Tongo. Shrien had approached Tongo, not the other way around, as corroborated by Shrien's initial statements as well as Tongo's. The businessman, who was used to a life of luxury, had turned down the Cape Grace BMW service for a ride in a Volkswagen Chiron, hardly in the same league at all. The couple had exchanged a friendly conversation with Tongo in the car, including where they were from, their recent wedding, and their safari experience. So, just a heads up, there is a lot of CCTV footage in this case, and I will be sharing all relevant videos, as they play a major role in understanding the narrative and chain of events. CCTV footage at the Cape Grace Hotel captures Tongo's shuttle park at the entrance of the hotel that Saturday. Annie then exits the vehicle and walks into the lobby to check in. Shrien, however, remained in the car, paying Tongo for his services, 250 Rand plus a 50 Rand tip. Tongo had then mentioned all the other tours and services that he offered, and Shrien had inquired about a private helicopter ride. Shrien had then emerged from the vehicle around 5 minutes later and joined Annie inside. The initial 5 minutes spent in the vehicle whilst Annie was checking in was when Shrien had expressed that he wanted someone taken off the scene. He stated that it was a woman, but didn't mention a name, and said that they would be arriving the next day. Annie is then shown to the room, whereas Shrien leaves to use the lobby bathroom. Another camera picks up Shrien leaving the hotel and walking back towards Tongo's park shuttle across the road. There, he had further discussed the helicopter ride with Tongo, and the two had exchanged numbers. 9 minutes later, he returned once again to the hotel. In the subsequent 9 minutes, where Shrien had alleged they were talking about tour plans and helicopter plans, Tongo had alleged that it was here that Shrien had offered 15,000 Rand for the job to be done and said that he would pay in dollars. He also stated that he would help Tongo's business grow. Tongo had stated that he does not engage in such affairs, however, he may know someone who would be able to help. Shrien later asked about a place where he could exchange his dollars without having to produce his passport. He then briefly inquired about exchanging money at the front desk, as well as being potentially upgraded to a honeymoon suite, and he had then walked to his room. Later that day, Tongo had contacted a friend who worked at the reception of the Coliseum Protea Hotel, Monde Mblolombo. Although Monde was not involved in such activities, he suggested inquiring from a man he knew, Mzi wa Madoda Ngwabe. When he had received the call, he was with his friend, Olile Mgeni, the man who would be the second gunman. After hearing the amount that was offered for the job, 15,000 Rand, he agreed. Whilst those arrangements were being made, Annie, completely unaware, was having a few drinks with Shrien at the bar. Shortly after, they took a walk to the waterfront to have dinner at Safruga, an upmarket seafood restaurant, just past 8 p.m. The waitress who had served them would later remark that they were not your typical honeymoon couple, not really hugging or kissing. At one point, Shrien had even left Annie alone, about an hour into their dinner. According to the waitress, Annie had told her that he was on a business call. However, he had later said that he had gone to fetch his phone, which he had accidentally left in his room. It was at this point in the evening that CCTV footage captured Shrien arriving back at the hotel. He then, after receiving a text message from Tongo, had called him back and spoken to him on the phone for 5 minutes and 26 seconds at 9:28. When cell phone records later showed the call, Shrien had stated that Tongo had simply been contacting them to find out how their stay was going and if they were interested in any other activities. He had then inquired again about the helicopter ride, to which Tongo had stated that he had managed to arrange it for 15,000 Rand, all cash and off the books. Now, just on a side note, anyone who is familiar with aviation or just uses pure logic would understand that a trip like that cannot be off the books. Permissions are needed to take off as well as to fly over certain airspace. Can you imagine if helicopters and the like were allowed to do as they pleased? Tongo had let Shrien know that he had found people who were willing to do the job. However, they wanted to be paid in rands, not dollars. Shrien had then once again asked about the currency exchange location. The couple returned to the hotel around 11 p.m. Shrien evidently beaming, Annie not so much, as he made a shooting gesture towards her. She had not responded to that. The next morning, the couple had breakfast and they visited the pool. It was apparently so hot that day that they had decided to skip any outdoor activities. Shrien had then told Annie that he was going to get his hair cut, something that she had apparently encouraged him to do, which is really a strange thing to do on your honeymoon. But anyways. In his later plea explanation, though, he would state that he told Annie that he was going to exchange currency and she decided that she would rather stay by the pool. Shrien had then left her, gone about his business, and he had returned and the couple had had lunch around 4 p.m. at the hotel. The next day, an average of 21 degrees as per historical records, not extremely hot. An anxious Shrien, according to Tongo, had not gone for his haircut initially. Shrien would later state that he only appeared anxious because Tongo was late. He had left with Tongo around 12 p.m. to visit a black market currency exchange location in Green Market Square, Golden Touch Jewelers. And it was there that he had exchanged around $1,500 for 10,200 Rand, as confirmed by the owner. However, Shrien would later say that he exchanged pounds. With no paper trail and no passport produced, this could never be proven. In addition to an initial amount that he had exchanged the previous day at the waterfront, he would have exchanged around 21,500. During the car ride back, it would later be alleged that the pair had discussed how the hijacking would take place in order to conceal the true nature of the attack. That afternoon, Tongo, according to Kwabe's plea agreement, had contacted him around 3 p.m. to confirm all the details for the evening's hijacking. It was later agreed and not under dispute that Tongo would bring the couple into the township where the wife would be killed to look like a hijacking. Tongo and the husband would be left unharmed and Tongo's phone would be taken during the robbery. 15,000 Rand would be left in the cubbyhole and the hijacking itself would occur in Guguletu near to NY 112. That very day, whilst Shrien was out exchanging the money, Vinaud had phoned his phone number, hoping to speak to Annie, but obviously was unable to do so. When Shrien had returned to the hotel, Annie had the opportunity to speak to her parents, most likely in the company of Shrien. I mean, it was his phone after all. Vinaud recalls Annie's tone of voice being strange, and she later spoke in Swedish, which Shrien did not understand. She had said that she had so much to tell Vinaud and that she would be home on Tuesday. But instead of excitement, her voice was full of worry. She then spoke to her mother and said the exact same thing. CCTV footage at the Cape Grace later showed Shrien waiting in the corridor for Annie before they headed to the bar. The footage at the bar shows them hugging and kissing, behavior that is rarely seen on any previous footage of the supposed lovebirds. At the bar, Shrien makes a call to Tongo, who is running late as he was supposed to pick them up at 7:30 p.m. The couple had a 9:30 p.m. reservation at the Lord Charles Hotel in Somerset West, about 45 kilometers away. But en route, the couple had decided that they didn't feel like a heavy meal because they had had lunch very late, and Annie had felt like sushi again, and so Tongo had changed his route. It was during this initial ride that Tongo had taken a detour to showcase Mzoli's, a vibrant traditional restaurant in the heart of Guguletu, to the couple. Shrien recalled in his official plea explanation that he saw people with drinks and a barbecue having a good time with loud music playing. Tongo had then brought the couple to Surfside Restaurant in Strand, a place he often brought other tourists to. During that evening, it turns out that the two hijackers were struggling to find transport from Khayelitsha to Guguletu. Tonga had let them know that he was leaving the hotel at just past 8 p.m. He had then taken a detour from the N2 highway into Guguletu to the intersection that they had agreed to meet at. However, no one was there. After calling them and speaking to them in a foreign language, so obviously Shrien and Annie did not understand, he had then established that they were both still in Khayelitsha. This is where Shrien had stated that Tongo had taken them to see Mzoli's. However, there's one major problem with that. Mzoli's closed at 7 p.m. So, whereas there may have been some stragglers just after closing, according to the local residents as well as the information available on the restaurant itself, the streets would have been quiet and pretty empty around 9 p.m. And how does a tour guide who supposedly knows the city so well not know that arguably the most famous township restaurant closes at 7 p.m.? Yeah, no. That's kinda sus. It was at this point that Tongo had taken them to Strand in order to play for some time. CCTV footage shows them arriving around 9:33 p.m. However, the restaurant they had visited specifically for sushi had closed their sushi bar at 9 p.m. and so Annie had had a vegetable curry. Just before 10 p.m., Shrien had gone to the bathroom and there he had seen a missed call from Tongo. He had attempted to call him back, but after a few seconds it was incredibly noisy in the restaurant, and so he had gone outside to speak to him where Tongo was waiting by his vehicle. The brief phone call and later in-person conversation revolved around what had gone wrong and what the new POA would be. Between 10 and 17 minutes past 10, 4 messages were exchanged between the two. In the first, Tongo said things had been sorted out. In the last, which was received from Shrien, it stated that the couple were done and ready to leave. At the time of the last message being received, Tongo had called Ngwabe to let them know that they were en route. Around 10:24 p.m., CCTV footage show the couple leave the restaurant. Shrien walks, hands in his pockets, several paces in front of Annie, who walks with her head bowed, fiddling with her handbag. It is apparently on this ride that Annie, after Tongo mentions it, decides that she wants to see the real Cape Town nightlife. Nightlife in a township. This story would slightly change though. However, according to an interview that Shrien had given 56 hours later, he had said, "She felt as if the area around our hotel was just like at home, so clean and safe, and to be honest, a bit sterile. She had never been to Africa before, so she suggested that we have a look at the real Africa. The stop was on the way back and was intended so we could experience townships. During the car ride, Shrien had been sending text messages to Tongo about the surprise helicopter ride. He had apparently brought 10,000 Rand cash with him, and at some point in this romantic dinner evening was going to meet the pilot and exchange the cash. He had also kept the surprise helicopter money in Annie's purse. Look, I'm just curious as to how he explained that to her. Like, surely she didn't think that they were going to spend 10,000 Rand on dinner, especially at the restaurant they ended up at. During the car ride, Tongo and Shrien had continued to send text messages to one another. But what could they possibly be speaking about that couldn't be said out loud? Tongo had asked Shrien if he had the money, and Shrien had replied in the affirmative. Shrien had then went on to tell him that he had put the money in the pouch of the front passenger seat. In many of the later accounts given by Shrien, this 10,000 Rand is omitted. The fact remains, though, that after the hijacking was done, the money was found right where Shrien had told Tongo it would be. The couple sitting in the back of the car was scrolling through pictures that they had taken on safari and on their holiday when they had exited the highway, and Shrien had noticed a green road marking sign indicating they were entering Guguletu. They were then hijacked by two African men with guns. The men had banged their guns on the window, and shortly after letting the driver Tongo out, they had demanded the couple's money and phones. They then proceeded to get into the vehicle and drive away, with the couple still in the vehicle told to stay down. At some point, they had apparently passed a police car, and they had told Shrien alone to just sit up. Annie had said to Shrien in Gujarati that she was taking off her rings as she apparently did not want the men to get them. Annie was also shouting and was apparently hysterical, and the men had demanded that Shrien shut her up. They then went on to state that they would let the couple go, but just not together. Shrien was then dumped out of the window while the vehicle was moving. He had apparently landed on his head and shoulder in the sand. The car had then sped off. As he was so luckily dumped in such a well-lit area, he had then run door to door, and about 10 minutes later, he had found a man, Sibonele Mtakazi, who was putting his car away and had called the police for him. After driving around with police officers looking for the vehicle and Annie to absolutely no avail, he had then been taken back to the hotel. Tongo, who had gone to the Guguletu police station to report the crime, was also taken to the Cape Grace. Shrien and Tongo are now both back at the Cape Grace, where allegedly Shrien asked him whether the job had been done. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage doesn't have audio, so it is unclear what was said during this time. During their conversation, though, Tongo said that he alerted Shrien to the CCTV cameras, and shortly after, Shrien is seen glancing at them. A little while later, a cleaner is asked to leave the area to give them privacy. Both men, according to body language experts, did not show any signs of the trauma they had just experienced. Shrien was on his feet almost this entire time, and not once was he seen to touch or rub his face. Common actions of someone who is in distress. Additionally, for someone who was allegedly comforting Shrien, Tongo did not display one comforting gesture, instead sitting with his arms crossed defensively. The next morning, a terrible discovery is made. An anonymous eyewitness who was 20 years old stated that she and her brother saw the abandoned car outside, which was something out of the ordinary. They had gone to look, and sometime between 7 and 8 a.m., the police had arrived. Annie was in the vehicle with her head rested against the door. And as the door was opened, the gruesome scene was discovered. Later reports would show that she was not sexually assaulted, and she suffered a single gunshot wound to the neck and hand. Shortly after, the news was broken to Shrien back at the Cape Grace. The murder of Annie is still something there is much mystery around. There were conflicting reports by both hijackers, but the fact remains regardless that during this period a gunshot was fired, ending her life. The shot was not to her head, but you must keep in mind that during this time she was not restrained. She was probably fighting for her life, as indicated by the bruise marks on her legs, and her attackers, well, they were not trained assassins in the least. They were amateurs. The hijackers had then abandoned the vehicle. Yet another strange aspect of this supposed hijacking, as later insinuated. It takes only half an hour for professionals to strip a car of its major parts. These can be sold to turn even more profit for the sellers. If money was truly the primary motive for this hijacking, then Annie's body would have been dumped and the car would have been stripped. But yet, it was abandoned. So, before I get into the events that transpired after Annie was found, I just want to recap on some of the troubling elements that you may have noticed in the previous segment. Shrien would later state in his plea explanation that he was arranging a helicopter ride with Tongo. That's what all the subterfuge, SMSs, and money exchanged was about. However, it doesn't really make sense why he would need to go through Tongo for this service, as the waterfront was full of companies offering the service he was supposedly seeking. 3 of these very companies right next to Safruga, the restaurant he visited that Friday night with Annie. So why even try to go through Tongo when he could have booked for cheaper through one of those companies or even the hotel? In a conversation he would later have with Annie's family, a few days after her death, he would fail to mention this gigantic romantic gesture he had planned. But he did mention that he had bought her a red rose the night prior to her murder. His entire helicopter story was only aired publicly in his plea explanation 4 years later, after the BBC documentary had aired. Up until that point, besides mention of it in an interview where that info wasn't published, no one had any clue about the helicopter. In later examination, those details are not the only ones subjected to adjustment on Shrien's behalf. In regards to being asked why he chose Tongo's service over the hotel's BMW shuttle service, Shrien had stated that the hotel didn't offer rides as far as restaurants in the Strand, which, after confirmation was received from a driver and staff member at the Cape Grace, turned out to be false. One of the biggest points of difference in the statements made by Shrien was that Annie wanted to see the real Africa and the nightlife in the townships. However, after he was named as a suspect, the story changed to Tongo wanting to go to Guguletu and Annie just saying whatever whilst scrolling through pictures of the safari. He went from essentially placing the blame on Annie to essentially placing the blame on Tongo. Shrien would also make mention of the buzzing hive that was Mzoli's. However, they had closed at 7 p.m. So what exactly was he talking about? And then came the hijacking itself. Shrien had previously stated in both statements as well as his plea explanation that he had handed over his Rado watch, the 4,000 rand in his wallet, Annie's Armani watch, and her handbag, which contained her cell phone. No direct mention of the 10,000 rand. How odd. And perhaps one of the biggest things I noticed was that, as per Shrien's statement and the police statement that he had given, he said that he was pulled out of the vehicle. During an interview he had given shortly after the murder, however, he claimed that he was dumped from the vehicle. One word indicates someone pulling him through, whereas the other word indicates being pushed. I definitely understand that in such a traumatic moment, that might not have been a memorable detail, but he had also gone on to be able to describe that one of the hijackers had 2 piercings in his right ear. Now, whilst it is completely conceivable that recollection might differ slightly over time, the truth is the truth, and thus should more or less always be the same. Regardless, the vehicle was moving slowly, and in Shriyan's own words, after going through the window, he landed on his shoulder and forehead in the sand. However, later CCTV footage showed him looking pretty pristine, with no damage to his face or suit. Also, that particular model of car has a factory-tempered glass pane that protrudes around 19 centimeters from the door panel at all times, in a safety feature to protect children from falling out. Thus, Shriyan would have gone over that thin glass edge of the window and then fallen headfirst, about 1.6 meters to the rough ground surface, with not one scratch. This theory was later tested by the Mollett brothers, and it was established that if you were to exit the vehicle through the window, you'd have to be standing on the seat, and you would inevitably end up with some form of bodily damage, especially if you were falling head first, mainly a fractured wrist or even broken bones. And the last thing for now, Annie's wedding engagement ring was later found and returned to Shriyan. One wedged in her seat and one under her body. Which begs the question, if the purpose of this attack was financial, why not take arguably one of the most expensive items, a diamond ring? I mean, that ring was worth thousands of rands. However, if the purpose and primary intention was to kill, then taking items of monetary value was a secondary and less important motive. Living in South Africa almost all of my life has taught me that hijackings almost always end in the very same way. The hijacker will either kill whomever is in the vehicle and the vehicle will never be seen again, or the hijacker will kick whomever is in the vehicle out and the vehicle will never be seen again. The common factor here, the vehicle is never seen again. And then there was the insinuation that the motive for this killing was to rape Annie, which, if that was the case, Shriyan would have been killed immediately in order to get him out the way. Speaking of Shriyan, one of the things that shocked me in this entire episode was his response to the events that had occurred. I, for one, fully understand that grief and trauma present in different ways and different stages. But throughout everything, Shriyan was incredibly focused on showcasing a very specific chain of events, and whilst doing so, illustrated certain behaviors. Let me explain. From the moment he walked back into the hotel after the hijacking, his body language did not signal someone in a state of shock or trauma. And then there was the way that he treated Annie's father after everything had happened. The day Annie's body was discovered, her father was already on his way to Cape Town because he had heard that she had been hijacked the night before. He unfortunately received the news that she had been shot dead just before boarding his flight from Amsterdam. Shortly after disembarking, he had arrived at the Cape Grace Hotel, and all he wanted to do was see his daughter's body. Shriyan had immediately said that no, that was not allowed, which, fair enough, perhaps it wasn't. But it was his further explanation that was the most shocking to me. He had finished the statement by saying that her body was drained and they needed to put liquid back into her. He said this nonchalantly to the father of the deceased person he was talking about. What? Later that night, despite Shriyan and his father Prakash, who had flown down, enjoying their meal, Vinod could not eat. The following day, when he was allowed to see Annie's body, he had asked Shriyan if he would accompany him, to which Shriyan had said no, he didn't want to go because it would make him too depressed. Instead, that day he had gone to the hairdresser's and he had bought a new suit, leaving a grieving father to go visit his daughter in the morgue alone. When another acquaintance, a woman that Annie had actually met on safari, had shared her sympathies after hearing the news and reading about it, he had answered something along the lines of, "It's been a disaster from start to finish." All of these responses, separately received and recorded, were not the typical response of a grieving husband. Shriyan also gave multiple interviews starting just 2 days after the murder, And according to the journalist who interviewed him, he was quite up to date with the media that had been posted online about the case so far. His browser history, which I will discuss a little while later, was also quite out of the ordinary. In the days that followed, the police set to work on finding the hijackers, and in that time period, they allowed Shrien to travel back to the UK, which is what he did on the 16th of November, along with Annie's body. The day he left, he met with Tongo for the final time. CCTV captures him carrying a small white plastic bag into the communications room of the hotel. Tongo enters the room shortly after, and about a minute later he exits again, the white bag supposedly under his clothing. Tongo then visited the bathroom before exiting the hotel, where the white bag was now in his hand. He would later claim that there was only 1,000 rand in that bag, not the 5,000 rand he was promised. Here is a close-up of the bag for interest's sake. So Shrien was back in the UK, and the South African police were actually quite hard at work, dusting for palm prints and fingerprints, which would quite quickly lead them to their first suspect, Mngeni. The trials of the various perpetrators all took place at different times and points, so I'm just going to summarize basically who was involved and their brief story before we focus on Shrien. Xolile Mngeni was 26 years old and lived in Khayelitsha with his grandmother. After his arrest, he was questioned in the Hawks headquarters. Throughout his statements, he never once implicated Shrien nor any other individual. He also gave the name Mawawe as his accomplice. Shortly after, it was discovered that Mawawe didn't exist, and that it was actually Mziwa Madoda Ngwabe, who lived just a 5-minute drive away. Mngeni's obvious admission of truth in regards to even Tonga's involvement showcased deception. During his trial, he would claim that he was assaulted by police, even though his entire interview was taped. He then went on to state that the footage was tampered with. His trial was also delayed due to him being diagnosed with a brain tumor of his pituitary gland. He would receive surgery, however, he would later die in jail. Mziwa Madoda Ngwabe was a 26-year-old man from Khayelitsha, who was described as a polite young man. His parents had a rocky relationship, but his father had a good job, and very soon he began to work with his father. However, in January of 2010, they had both lost their jobs. Shortly after, in June, he had also lost his father. And very soon after that, he began to interact with the wrong crowds, drinking and partying all night. About 50 minutes after his friend's confession, he admitted the conspiracy to murder Annie. In 2011, during a bail hearing, he would claim that he was beaten by police and coerced into implicating Shrien. However, after 18 months in prison in August 2012, he reverted back to his initial narrative, and he signed a plea bargain that would sentence him to 17 years in prison. During the much later trial, he provided a clear and detailed chronological order of events, and although subjected to long cross-examination, did not contradict himself once. Much of his testimony was corroborated by other witnesses and evidence, and furthermore, he appeared to be an intelligent person. Zola Robert Tongo was a 31-year-old man from Monster Street in Bottasach. According to friends and family, he was a hard worker who kept to himself, who worked as a taxi driver amongst other side jobs. He had 5 children, all under the age of 10 years old. At the time, Tongo was supplementing his mother, a domestic worker's income, as well as contributing to the support of his younger sister, who was 14 years old at the time. Tongo, during his trial, faced 4 charges: kidnapping, robbery with aggravating circumstances, murder, and obstructing the administration of justice. Monde Umbolombo received full immunity from prosecution and was not punished for his self-confessed role in the crime, nor for his self-confessed perjury while testifying. On the 19th of November 2015, the Director of Public Prosecutions decided that he could not be persecuted. And so we move back to the UK, where Shrien and the body of Annie have arrived. When Annie's body was brought back to London prior to her cremation, the Hindocha family had gathered around her to say their final goodbyes. Although traditionally it is a female who'll dress the females, Shrien was there from the very beginning. Sneha did her makeup and Ami, her sister, dressed her body. It was at this point that Shrien's actions would shock all of those around him, including his own family. He had tried to place a bangle on her wrist, but as rigor mortis had set in, her hand was difficult to move. After tugging and pulling, Sneha had asked him to please stop, as I'm sure it was traumatizing to watch. He had then just dropped her hand and let it bang on the metal table that she lay on. That is not characteristic of someone who deeply cared about their partner. Shrien would go on that day to not allow Neelam, her mother, to sit alone with her body, stating that it was against the rules. Ami would later ask the manager of the establishment for the allowance, which he gladly consented to without any issue. Shrien, it turns out, was in a rush that day, as his father was picking him up at 6 p.m. for a pizza party. A pizza party to celebrate Annie's life. But before he left, he also went on to ban her sister, Ami, from speaking at the memorial the next day, because they had gotten into a fight. The next day at the memorial, Ami had another family member read her statement, much to Shrien's dismay. He had also taken all of the letters the Hindocha family had written and placed in her casket and threw them to the ground. He had then proceeded to fight with Ami when she had asked for her parents to have a few moments alone with their daughter to say their goodbyes. His brother had tried to intercede, but Shrien was quite headfast. And as a result, Ami never got her moment alone with her sister to say goodbye because the memorial started. The Hindocha family, although upset and shocked by his actions, initially thought that he was just in deep grief and mourning. But it was just a day or so later when both Tongo and Kwabe had implicated Shrien as the one who had ordered the hit, and media reports went wild with speculation. And so, on the 23rd of November, Shrien rejected any speculation that he was involved in his wife's murder. Although Shrien had cooperated with South African police and left the country with the permission of the aforementioned police, on the 24th of November, he hired a publicist, Max Clifford. The purpose of Max? Well, he was there to crush unfounded suggestions that Shrien had any part to play in his wife's death. Now, I could go on about Max Clifford, but all you need to know is that Max Clifford was a UK publicist and quite a famous one. He worked with celebrities like Marlon Brando and Muhammad Ali. He was also later sentenced in 2014 to 8 years in prison after being found guilty of indecent assault of 4 girls and women between the ages of 15 and 19 years old. Charming. The thing is, those from the UK would know that Max Clifford was always planting embellished stories in the British tabloids. Many of those who enlisted his services did so not to ensure that the truth came out, but more than often to ensure the exact opposite. It's unclear how much Shrien was paying Max per month, but one can assume it was around the sum of £10,000 given the figures available from other clients. Far more than the 15,000 rand allegedly offered for Annie's life. The very next day, after hiring Max Clifford, Shrien's lawyer brother stated publicly that he was receiving medical assistance to help him deal with the trauma. UK newspapers and media sources would later report that Shrien spent hours clutching a Barbie doll that he had bought for Annie, unable to sleep and spending his days sobbing and suffering flashbacks of her death. Rumors of Shrien's sexuality began to spread, however, shortly after the murder. This led to a statement and adamant belief issued by Shrien that he, in fact, was not gay. He had followed this up with statements about how the couple were in talks about starting a family on their honeymoon, and in his later trial, he even produced supposed medical records proving this. This, however, was far from the truth. Sexual encounters with a male German prostitute
Leopold Laser
soon came to light, sparking rumors of Shrian's secret double life. The pair had met after Shrian had contacted
Leopold's
website German Master One in 2009, and altogether they had 3 meetings, where Shrian had paid him around £400 per session. The issue, however, was not his sexual orientation. It was the lies. Back in South Africa, the police had decided that it was time that Shrian returned to take part in the trial and share his side in the ongoing case. In December of 2010, he was arrested in Bristol at the request of the South African authorities. And so began the extradition process, which would take far longer than anyone could ever imagine. During the months and years to follow, Dewani's legal team would do their utmost to resist extradition, arguing that he was too ill to return as he had been diagnosed with an acute stress disorder and a depressive adjustment disorder. He would go on to appear at the extradition hearings looking disheveled and weary, and often was excused because he was so unwell. Although Shrian would not come back willingly, Annie's family visited South Africa the following year in March to say goodbye to their daughter in the location where her body was discovered. They also followed the route she took, stopping at the places she had stopped along her very last night. They left a memorial up in Gugulethu and they said their goodbyes. Later in May, the Hindocha family decided to gather in Sweden and have their very own memorial service to spread her ashes. As you will remember, Shrian kind of messed up the first one. And they did refuse Shrian's request to join the ceremony. Annie Hindocha's ashes were spread by the lake her family used to visit every summer. There was a beach near the headland, and Annie used to love playing in the sand and sunshine. Back in the UK, Shrian was still suffering, often unable to attend stressful court sessions, although it is alleged that he was spotted out and about at restaurants during this time. As the years went on and the battle for extradition continued, Shrian's legal team stated that they feared that he would be treated horrifically in South African prisons and potentially raped due to the rumors of his sexuality. Just weeks prior to the extradition finally being granted, Shrian allegedly overdosed or had a negative reaction to his medication. It was then reported in the British tabloids that he was placed on suicide watch. Later that month, Shrian became a patient at a celebrity mental health spa, a place that has hosted Lindsay Lohan, Robbie Williams, and many others before. It was here that some rather aggressive tendencies came to light. However, they were later blamed on him just having a reaction to the medication he was on. Whilst there, he had an argument with a fellow patient who then stated that he should go back to South Africa. And at that point, he had become incredibly angry and he had thrown a plate at their door. Shortly after this incident, and due to his continuous violent outbursts, the patients made a collective complaint. His behavior, according to a nurse there, was described as volatile and aggressive. It was determined that he would no longer be welcome at the clinic. He was then ruled to be moved to the Signet Hospital. In 2014, after losing an almost 4-year battle to avoid extradition, Shrian was sent back to South Africa on a private jet that cost the South African taxpayer over 2 million rand. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So Shrian was finally back in South Africa. But what about the other role players? Let's do a quick recap on their verdicts before we get to him. After Zola Tongo pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal on the 7th of December 2010, he was sentenced to 18 years in Malmesbury prison, receiving 7 years off his initial sentence. 10 years later in 2020, the day before he was set to be released on parole, his parole was denied after the Hindocha family voiced their upset. A source close to Tongo would later say that he was devastated at the turn of events and had already packed his bags and looked forward to reuniting with his family the following day. Schwabe was sentenced to 25 years in prison and will be eligible for release in 2027. After claims of police brutality and later brain surgery, Mgeni's trial finally began in 2012. Initially, he pleaded not guilty. However, on the 19th of November 2012, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, which is 25 years in South Africa. In July of 2014, a medical parole application was made due to his terminal brain tumor, but he was denied parole and died in Goodwood Prison on the 18th of October 2014. And so, with that, our attention is back to Shrien, who has just touched down in South Africa for the first time since Annie's murder. At his first hearing, he appeared bewildered and confused on the dock, although he was immaculately dressed in a black suit. Shrien was immediately placed into the secure unit of the Valkenburg Psychiatric Hospital. It was only as a result of his medical conditions diagnosed in the UK that he was placed into Valkenburg Psychiatric Hospital and not a Cape Town prison. He was then subject to a 30-day assessment in order to establish if he was fit to stand trial. I actually remember this quite vividly, as at the time I was actually working in Valkenburg, however not in Ward 20, an extremely secure section on the grounds reserved for maximum security patients as well as observations. Shrien, however, was not subjected to the standard quality of life that other patients experience during observation, with him having access, according to staff members, to his own bedding, books, and specially prepared meals. He also had access to his iPad, which wasn't even allowed in the hospital. In his room, he also had his own desk, and he had spent most of his time reading. He received visits once a week for 2 hours at a time on a Thursday from 6 members of his family, including his father and his brother. He was later spotted smiling and walking with a fellow patient and a staff member. He painted a very different picture to the emotionless, distraught man who had initially appeared in court. However, his state of mind was once again in the news after reacting to a loud sound that a cleaner had made. A cleaner had moved a metal bed which made a screeching noise, and he had immediately had a negative reaction or attack. He had closed his eyes and blocked his ears, and he was taken into the hospital, only returning 5 hours later. From this reaction to the noise, it was thought that he could definitely be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, as previously mentioned. Sensitivity to noise and abnormal responses are hallmarks of these types of disorders. But what about the concept of malingering, which I also did mention in my previous episode last week, the samurai killer case? Whereas malingering is not as uncommon as one may think, the constant observation in Valkenburg would highlight the inconsistencies in a faked response. Psychologist Ian Mayer would state, "If you are trying to feign mental illness, you have to do a pretty competent job and keep it up for 30 days. Before he was extradited, however, it was mentioned in August of 2010 that the judge was convinced that his illness and symptoms were genuine, even though he did not elect to undertake the so-called malingering test. It would later be divulged that his mental condition had improved extensively to the point where he was considered fit to stand trial." With the Director of Public Prosecutions, Rodney de Kock, telling the court, "The accused is not mentally ill. The accused is not certifiable in terms of the Mental Health Act." The Hindocha family had then traveled to South Africa in the hopes of receiving answers and, of course, some form of closure. During the 2014 trial, so many shocking revelations came to light. It was discovered that Shrien was in fact sleeping with men, including male prostitutes, prior to marrying Annie. It would later be divulged that he was a premium member of 2 gay hookup sites, Gaydar and Recon, and had been a member since 2004. His profile under the username Asian Subguy stated that he was passive. It would later turn out that Shrien had paid to engage in some pretty questionable activities, which were all revealed in his statement listed in court documents. Journalist Nick Parker also came to the court and was in the witness box for an hour. He said Shrien had threatened to sue his newspaper, The Sun, if it connected him with the German master. Although the article was published, Shrien never took any legal action against them. But it didn't stop there. There was yet another court revelation. Remember I mentioned his browser history? He had been browsing Gaydar and Recon even whilst waiting in the Johannesburg airport for his connecting flight to Cape Town, whilst Annie was with him. His browser history further showed that he had logged on just 2 days after his wife was murdered, on the 15th of November. He had also visited another site too, each visit lasting about an hour. The following day, he had logged on yet again, twice. Sorry, grieving husband, say what? And then on the 21st of November, for the first time in 6 years, his account was suddenly deactivated. When it came time to his plea explanation, even though he had vehemently claimed before that he was in fact not gay, he now went on record stating that he was indeed bisexual. The issue here is once again not his sexuality, but rather his lies. His defense went on to focus on the testimony of Tongo, who unfortunately 4 years later, when remembering the events, contradicted himself at points over issues like when he had called Shrien or whether he had walked in front of him or behind him, for example. All of these contradictions allowed the defense to demonstrate that he was an unreliable witness, and therefore they were able to create reasonable doubt. In court, it was argued by Francois van Zyl, Shrien's defense lawyer, that the prosecution's case was weak and implausible. They applied under Section 174 of the South African Criminal Procedures Act to have the charges against Shrien dismissed. Prior to Shrien even testifying or getting on the stand, the judge in the case, Jeanette Traverso, had said the following: "There is no evidence on which a court acting reasonably could convict. There have been so many mistakes, lies, and inconsistencies that one simply cannot know where the lies end and the truth begins." After only hearing half a court case, she gave her final definitive decision. The accused is found not guilty of the charges. Given all the evidence and the testimony that came out in the trial about Shrien's sexuality, the judge never left any room to engage or explore the implications of the double life that his sexuality led to. She aimed to not focus and not make sexuality part of the trial. However, there was so much to explore, as it wasn't necessarily about his sexuality, but rather it pointed to the fact that Annie's tragic demise could have been him attempting to protect his secret. Unfortunately, it's not unheard of for individuals living a double life to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. Just take the Jinde and Rani case, for example. After the verdict was heard, the Hindocha family were crushed. Annie's sister Ami made the following statement: "All we wanted was to hear all the events. The hopes of finding that out has kept us as a family going. We feel that right has been taken away from us. We feel really, really sad because we never heard the full story of Shrien." Shrien's only official statement that I could find in regards to absolutely everything that had occurred was the following: "I would like to make clear that I have a significant number of questions which remain unanswered about the night that my wife and I were kidnapped, and Annie was tragically shot after being taken away from me. Each of the gang members did a deal with the authorities to gain either full immunity or vastly reduced sentences in return for providing evidence against me. It is the evidence of these proven liars that led to a witch hunt against me, and the resulting failure to pursue the truth of what happened that night. This has allowed the individuals concerned to literally get away with murder. I understand and share the Hindocha family's frustrations." So, although we may never hear the truth from Shrien and his testimony may never be cross-examined, let's look at what we can explore. Primarily, the factors and potential motives that led up to this tragic crime. If you were going to commit a crime, why pick South Africa? It's often interesting to me, especially since I started this true crime series, to hear how foreigners, anyone not from SA, view and understand South Africa. I find it super fascinating as their views can only be dictated by online articles or videos about the country. I don't think it's anyone's fault for seeing South Africa in a particular light. I mean, honestly, it's really difficult to understand any place without living in it for a little while. Keeping that in mind, South Africa is of course a beautiful country with some of the most amazing people. But there are significant structural, governmental, and safety issues that cannot be ignored. And it's often mainly only these issues that are broadcast to the world. Like they say, bad news sells. The viewpoint, therefore, of many, not all, but many, is unconsciously warped to understand South Africa as being only a dangerous, primitive, extremely underdeveloped land, abundant in wild animals, supposedly in our backyards. Like, for example, when Gugulethu is mentioned in basically all of the documentaries and videos that I watched on this case, they always use variations of one set of crime statistics, which go a little something like this. There were over 700 murders between 2005 and 2010, amounting to one murder every 2.5 days for 5 consecutive years, all within a 6.5 square kilometer piece of land. But you see, what they don't mention is this. Gugulethu, in English translating to Our Pride, was built to accommodate migrant workers, predominantly black South Africans, who during apartheid were not allowed to live in the city. In no time at all, poverty and overcrowding became major issues, which unfortunately have only become worse over the years. Now, the majority of individuals occupy tin shacks, with a few residents having brick and mortar houses. Majority of the residents go to work and school daily, they have families, and they just want to exist and live in peace. The community, however, live in terror of the minority, a smaller group of individuals who do not share their views of peace. Community leaders are often saying, it is high time that the Gugulethu community reclaim our streets and take it from these criminal elements that are terrorizing our community. We are sick and tired of living in fear. The criminals, although not the majority, have massive control. The crime stats often show an incomplete story. So it's not inconceivable that in Shrien's mind, South Africa, although beautiful, was a place that is high in crime. The next conclusion to be made from this point would be the stereotyped belief that a certain class, group, or race of people would have some sort of link to criminal activities. So, although it was unfortunately the case in this scenario, it's not always. Tongor actually had no history of robbing tourists. Like I explained just previously, there are so many hard-working people who live in these areas that have zero links to criminal activities. Not everyone can be painted with the same brush, but perhaps one might not know or think this if one has not lived here for an extended period of time. Shrien, out of all the available drivers, chose the man who was not dressed up smartly like the other drivers, and who he would later discover drove a 2003 Volkswagen Charan, not a top-of-the-range vehicle. Thus, it would perhaps signal to him that this man could use an increase in income and business. Then, from a crime perspective, given the number of crimes occurring daily or every week, the potential of one single hijacking making the news may not have seemed too likely. This could be compounded by the belief that perhaps our media and journalists were also potentially unequipped or inundated to cover every murder case, especially from areas known for their high levels of crime. And that isn't such a far-fetched belief. Then looking at the actual handling of crimes, the resources available in South Africa are often far more overloaded and in some cases not as technically advanced as in other countries. Many of these issues actually come from a lack of equipment as well as trained individuals, combined with the number of cases that pop up daily. All these factors would most definitely lead one who is not from South Africa to develop a very specific framework and view of the country. But like I said, it's just speculation. Many will and did ask, why risk your life and your freedom for 5,000 Rand? For 10,000 Rand, for 15,000 Rand. If you look at the economic landscape of the majority of South Africa, that money is more than many have. Consider the fact that both hijackers could barely afford transport to get from Khayelitsha to Gugulethu in the first place. It really isn't too difficult to see how the socio-economic situation in the country can easily be exploited. In December of 2010, a journalist, Sandiso Phaliso, who lives in a township in Cape Town, was given the task by West Cape News, for interest's sake, to find out how easy it was to hire a hitman in Cape Town. Within half a day, he found 3 men willing to do the job from 5,000 Rand to 15,000 Rand. He said he knew all the gangs there, so he knew who to approach. And that's precisely the point I made earlier when explaining Gugulethu. South African townships are particularly dangerous because of certain groups of individuals who operate in certain areas. It was estimated that Tongo was only earning around 9,000 Rand a month, working as a full-time driver for Platinum Escape Tours, as well as a part-time taxi driver with his own vehicle. Therefore, the allure of 5,000 Rand was enough to pique his interest. I mean, at the end of the day, in his eyes, he was simply the middleman. A middleman who would be bringing home an extra 5,000 Rand for his 5 kids. Tongo would also go on to state that it was also the promise that Shrien made him to grow his business that led him to accept the offer in the first place. And that's the thing with Shrien. He was really good at speaking his way around people. I mean, it was one of the qualities that made him such a great businessman too. And he seemed to many like a great guy. But there were obviously issues between Annie and him, so many asked, but if there were problems, why didn't she just leave him? Well, unfortunately, that was potentially a far harder thing to do at the time due to many different factors at play. Take into consideration, firstly, the Indian cultural importance placed on marriage. Let's look deeper at the view of marriage and divorce within Indian cultures. In India, the divorce rate is 1%. Yes, 1% of marriages end in divorce. So, whereas in another part of the world, a divorce party with an epic cake and a destruction of your wedding dress may be a thing, in Indian culture, divorce brings dishonor to the family name, especially for the parents of a female divorcee. In some more religious parts of India, for instance, death is even considered better than divorce. Now, I'm not saying that this is or was the case with Annie's family, nor am I saying that this is the case with every Indian family. Rather, I'm offering a potential perspective in order to showcase the varying viewpoints and the overall belief system, whether it is extreme or slight. The fact remains that Annie cared deeply for her family, and I'm sure she would have never wanted them to suffer in any way or form. Perhaps in her eyes, she didn't know how they may react to such news. She may also have very well been considering a divorce though, as she had expressed to her parents that she had something to tell them. But unfortunately, we will never know. In a similar light to the dishonor that divorce brings, being homosexual in an Indian culture, although today far more acceptable, has a historical record of leading to unimaginable violence and danger. I'm talking about secret honor killings level of danger. The result of this? Well, those who choose to stay in the proverbial closet deal with unimaginable psychological burden. And those who choose to be their authentic selves sometimes find themselves in danger. It's therefore not unlikely to consider that Shrien would have endured significant psychological distress due to his undisclosed sexual orientation. As he was not living in India, the danger posed may not have necessarily been physical, but rather emotional, and of course there was always the danger of being rejected or losing the respect of his friends or loved ones. However, what is interesting is that his sister Priyal, who is also a lawyer, identifies as a lesbian woman. There are, however, often different standards and rules that apply to females and males, not only in Indian culture, but in wider society. So Shrien might have very well chosen to keep that part of his life and himself a secret out of respect for his conservative Hindu family. After examination of his laptop, over 53 emails were found between him and an unknown man, where Annie and the upcoming marriage was discussed. His confusion of whether to get married or come out was also referenced. The German master, remember him, would later say that Shrien had confessed to him that he was about to be engaged to a nice, lovely girl, and he could not break it off as he would be disowned by his family. Annie had also confided in her cousin Sneha that sex with Shrien was not a thing, and he had impotence problems. He even traveled to Thailand shortly before the wedding for a treatment. This issue was never mentioned by any of the men he slept with, though. Regardless, this left poor Annie feeling like she was unattractive, as even on their wedding day, Shrien avoided any sexual encounter with her. She was miserable, and she would state how crying had become the norm. Yet she also knew that divorce wasn't really an option, and at the age of 28, the pressure was on for her to be married. And similarly, although Shrien's heart may not have potentially been in the marriage, it too was expected of him. He was almost 30 years old and he already had one failed engagement. But instead of working on reconciling a way forward to live an honest life, true to himself, he chose to continue to live a facade, roping Annie into the narrative, unbeknownst to her. And this was part of his personality, it seems. Annie would confide in her best friend, her cousin Sneha, on many occasions, describing Shrien as a controlling person, like a Hitler. Remember how she had left Sweden to move to Bristol to help him run his family business? Well, it kind of left her without a stream of income, as she was also unable to find a job. So he would instruct her to keep an Excel spreadsheet of her expenses, so that they could monitor what she was spending and buying. This level of control would also come up again during his plea explanation, where he recalled how he had casually joked about having her family credit card cancelled, as now his income was to be the only source for her. What? There is also an anecdote confirmed by the family of how Shrien called Annie his Barbie doll because of the way she dressed and her beauty. She was purely an object in his eyes, and she on occasion had also asked him to not treat her as such. His behavior, in my eyes, seems to have characteristics of narcissism, although I think many aspects of his personality were directly linked to the double life he was leading. The main traits potentially demonstrated included a consistent desire to be in control, a seeming lack of empathy, and an obsession with power and success. His obsession with control over every part of his life extended greatly to his finances, and not just in regards to Annie. Although he had the finances available, he had allegedly bargained Tongo down from 1,100 to 1,000 rand. In the next breath, however, a helicopter ride back in 2010 would have cost around 10,000 rand. However, he was willing to pay 15,000 Rand for it. The same man who flew first class and business, but instead of a luxury vehicle, decided to be chauffeured around in a 2003 Volkswagen Chiron. A British Airways source also confirmed that he had asked for a refund on Annie's plane ticket 5 days after she was murdered. And this is the same man who went on to tip the staff at the Cape Grace 15,000 Rand. It just doesn't add up. And unfortunately, due to so many things not adding up in the case itself, Shrien got the verdict he desired. During his trial and prior to it, it was claimed that the South African government was desperate to pin the crime on a foreigner in order to save the tourism industry in Cape Town. Because murder of a foreigner by a South African is bad for business. But locking up a foreigner without enough evidence is better? Please, make it make sense. And you know what's ironic though? The police actually didn't do a terrible job in this case. The fingerprint and palm print that was lifted from the crime scene was actually linked to an individual who was arrested quite quickly. Within a week, 4 individuals had been arrested. Far quicker than many other crimes are solved here. I'm just saying. Some South African officials, like Bheki Cele, the National Police Commissioner at the time, however, kind of lived up to the negative rep our police and government officials have. When he issued the statement, "A monkey came all the way from London to have his wife murdered here." Whether you agree with it or not, it just wasn't the thing to be saying. With the credibility of the witnesses being placed under inspection and reasonable doubt being found, Shrien was declared a free man. Many have their theories about how and why the verdicts that were given came about, and these often include great deals of money, influence, and power at play. But who is to ever know the truth? Today, whilst his fellow accused are either dead or in jail, Shrien is a free man living a life of luxury in a beautiful city with the love of his life, Brazilian-born photographer Gledison Lopez Martins. The couple have been together for 4 years now. They have holidayed in Ibiza and India, and the stills and videos show them at fancy dress parties, cuddling on the train, and even spending Christmas at the Dewani family home. Shrien has been welcomed back into the community, and friends and family maintain that he is 150% innocent. And to this day, he is described as an intelligent, respectable, and religious man. Annie Hindocha, however, was robbed of the opportunity to grow old, to have children, and to have someone to love her, the one thing she always wanted. I want to end this episode with the words from her father. "You loved your family and always put the family first. And the family loved you back just as much. You were so kind, so sweetly naive, and so honest. And these are the qualities and memories of you that I will keep close to my heart always. I love you. I always have, and I always will." Thank you for sticking with me through this intense journey of an episode. And thank you for remembering Annie, today on her birthday and always. Until next time, my loves, stay safe, stay blessed, and stay the amazing human beings that I know each and every single one of you are. Bye!